So Trump won. Let's talk about it. Things fall apart very slowly. And then, faster and faster, all of a sudden. There is no one big thing that has happened or is going to happen that is going to tip us into suddenly we're in the cool zone, the revolutionary moment has begun. But Trump coming back into office is a bigger thing. On top of that, America is the political and socioeconomic hegemon, and changes that happen, major changes like this, are going to affect people all around the world, and especially in countries as closely allied to America as the UK is. So, we'll talk about some of that too. The purpose of this video is primarily to say to people, it's okay to feel feelings of despair, fear, but panic is not serving you. You need to move through those feelings, and then you need to find answers, and you need to take action. To do that, first we have to have an analysis of power. We need to see what the incoming structure is, what changes are likely to happen, and what people should expect, and then figure out from there what the practical steps are for people to take. There was some immediate jostling and finger-pointing right after the election about whose fault it was that the Democrats had lost. It's the Democrats' fault that they lost.
We resolve our difference at the battle box.
Do not come. Do not come.
They weren't offering anything that most voters wanted to vote for at all. It was once again a massively, record even, don't quote me on that, but a ridiculously low turnout election, and they still lost. That means that with a candidate people dislike as much as Trump, excepting obviously his fanatical cult-like base, broadly people really dislike the guy, and still he won. That means the Democrats just were not offering anything at all. I think Palestine is a really useful microcosm or metonym to look at here, but you could just as easily talk about reproductive rights, or queer rights, or migrant issues, or single-payer healthcare. These are all issues that unite people quite strongly in America to think about what they want to protect, things that they want to bother to get out to the polling station to make a difference with their vote on.
I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
If they had had this much to offer the working class, people would have shown up for them. A guy shot a man to death in New York in the street, and he has a 70% approval rating. It's actually not hard to do things that gain broad popular support. I took a minute to get around to recording this, and Luigi is the biggest development in the meantime. I'm kind of glad that I hesitated and took my time, because the Luigi effect, if you want to name it, is this massive rise in class consciousness that has huge implications for everything I'm talking about here. Let me just check my facts on this one. 77%. The polling during the election showed that 77% of Harris voters supported a ceasefire in Gaza, and a majority of Americans wanted the government to support a ceasefire the day before the election. It's not complicated to say that any Democratic candidate could have said they supported a ceasefire and probably won. The American ruling class understands that it is in charge of an empire in decline. The Democrats can't offer more than simply not being Trump, because to offer more violates the interests of the imperial ruling class. Calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, for example, an uncomplicatedly popular move with the American public, where genocide has been recognized by international bodies, this was off the table. Because for the Democrats to do that, when the Democrats' base is progressive liberals, would mean recognizing that Israel and Israel supporters in the US were on the wrong side of history. That it was the morally wrong position to take. Republicans can do it just fine, because it's them being tough on foreign affairs. If the Democrats did it, it would damage America's hold over oil in the Middle East and over global shipping. We all need to understand that any reactionary shift in our politics that we fear is dwarfed by the implicitly reactionary nature of imperialism. The violence that imperialism does is the same whether it's happening to minorities in the imperial core or whole populations in the imperial periphery. Bringing back the imperialist status quo will not end that. I think sometimes I'm a pretty good writer. Sometimes I look at my notebook and I'm like, actually I can write. Actually, I can write with shit. The American Empire is a big, unwieldy thing without mind, memory, or center, and it isn't capable of recognizing that it would be better for it, that is to say, better for the people living in it, better for its long-term survival, to seed ground there in that way. That's just not how it, the organism of American imperialism, works. I'm deeply unmoved by talk that frames this as a problem of getting through the next little while and then getting the Democrats back in. The Democrats aren't going to improve the situation if they're re-elected, because every election from here until the end of the current political order is going to be the fascist versus technically not the fascist. Because it's a performance, and it sounds incredibly cynical and also like very shallow analysis to say something like elections are just a performance, but they really, really are. They're a performance with incredibly high stakes, and they keep everyone invested in the idea that there is a democratic process going on and they have a say and stuff. Can I have the argan oil, please? Thank you. They keep people, broadly invested in the idea that they have a say, or at least invested in the idea that if they don't use their say, then the bad man will come back. So that if they then use their say, they see that, they've elected the good woman. And so not having the bad man was a big collective effort we all put together, and now we saved the day.
And now what?
And now what, right? That's exactly it. Like, that's what I guess... This is where, it's not just Palestine, and it's not just reproductive rights, and it's not just workers' rights, and healthcare, and immigrants, and everything else you could say that it is. It is all of those things, but it's also just like that sense of now what that everyone had about the US elections, the impression that everyone felt that, like, if we did get Kamala Harris, what then? Like, on top of that, there's climate change to consider. How many American elections do you even think are left? No. This isn't about getting through a tricky few years. This is about getting out the other side of this nightmare and into a world worth living in. I simultaneously do and don't want to spend time here convincing people that what the American situation is driving towards is revolution. I do because, it's nice to be on the same page, right? And I don't because, come on? How are you not getting this by now? I also don't because, thinking massively big picture is not that helpful to people right now, in the same way that panicking isn't that helpful. What's helpful right now is organizing. Okay, all of that was preamble before we get to the immediate specifics of Trump coming back into power and what that's going to mean. And I think that's good because it's important to not just have this conversation like it's about Orange Man bad, like it's just about Trump. We have to understand a broader context here. The context of all that lives in the coconut tree and everything else, or whatever it was Kamala Harris said.
Everything is in context. My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
Now we should talk about Trump and his project. It is worthwhile being scared, because these are horrible, shitty people with bad intentions. We know what their plans are, and their plans suck. Things are going to suck for immigrants. Things are going to suck for the working class. Things are going to suck for queer people. Things are going to suck for women. However, Trump is not trying to build a white ethno-state, totalitarian, fascist, Handmaid's Tale America. It sure seems that way, and it might strike people as naive for me to say that that's not what he's aiming at, because he's surrounded by people who are. But the most powerful players in Trump's organization, in his movement, in his project, are consciously trying to accumulate a massive amount of wealth and pull the ladder up behind them as the American empire burns. The way they're trying to do this is fascism. They're emboldening white supremacists and queerphobes, bigots, misogynists because that is a base they can speak to who will not care that they are trying to do what they're trying to do. Most authoritarianism succeeds in every tiny everyday case by people just going along with it. When the Nazis, sorry to get dark, but this is what we're all thinking, when the Nazis were grabbing people to take them to concentration camps, historically, the majority of cases, the vast majority of cases where passers-by just intervened and just said, fuck off, don't do that. They didn't, because they couldn't. And that remains true today, albeit in a less totalitarian, fascistic case, but like we've seen with immigration raids, when communities come together to just tell like immigration forces, no, you're not kidnapping our neighbor and deporting them, they don't, because they can't, because we outnumber them. That's how this works. We outnumber them. That's the thing this always comes back down to over and over and over again. It's important in all of this to understand the authoritarian mindset. These are fascist bully boys. They're just testing the limits of what they can get away with, and the more resistance they're met with, the quicker they'll give up. Like, this is just... Observably, all these people think like teenage boys, and they just want to find out what is possible, what is the absolute maximum amount of getting away with shit they can do. Like when Trump's people talk about invading Greenland and Canada.
So we don't need their milk. We got a lot of milk.
That's an obvious distraction, right? We all went through one Trump term already. We know how we're just fire hosed with nonsense, bullshit, gibberish all the time, and it's exhausting. But also, it gauges the general mood and support for more American imperialism. Like, people might be looking at Trump talking about invading Greenland and saying, that's obviously silly, but yeah, we should make America great again. A strong America is good. They're just testing the limits of the possible. So we need to know the difference between distractions when we see them and the things Trump's state is actually trying to get away with, and when we see them trying to actually get away with something. At there, it's important to resist at every turn, because there it will set the limits of the possible for them, and they will know that people don't fucking want them to do that and are gonna stop them. Trump has built spectacular fascism, right? All of bourgeois politics exists in the world of the spectacle, and Trump has built this, like, bizarre mishmash monstrosity of an ally between far-right influences, the Silicon Valley tech bro elite ruling class, and some old money people who are on his side, like hyper-conservative, oil billionaire people, fundamentalist Christians. And it doesn't actually have broad-based support. This means that the case where people will be willing to intervene is just far more common, because they all feel that they're existing under something that is not them, that they are being oppressed. People hate having Trump in charge. People fucking hate Trump. Like, they just didn't see anything at all worth voting for the Democrats. Every accusation of confession is really useful when talking about conspiracy belief, because conspiracy belief reflects intergroup social conflicts. It's one of the 5 fundamental principles of conspiracy belief that I talk about when I talk about misinformation. The example I want to point to that relates to all of this is George Soros funding left-wing Antifa super soldier protesters from out of town who are being bussed in to help with left-wing protests. This accusation is a confession. The conjuring of this spectre of a left-wing billionaire funding left-wing activists is something that the far right loves to say because it soothes their consciences about taking money from right-wing billionaires. A thing that is a matter of public record, a thing that we all know is happening all the time. The fascists don't care what the project is among the ruling class and what it is they're trying to do, because along the way, they are funding and facilitating and emboldening more fascists. So when I say that's not the world Trump is trying to build, I'm not saying that out of any love for Trump or sympathy for him or defense of his character, nor am I saying that it's not going to lead to that kind of world in parts of America. It probably is. Things are going to get really fucking dark for a bunch of people. I'm trying to say that is not what they are trying to build towards. Over the last decade, a bunch of people of colour and queer people have already been internally displaced across the North American continent. That is going to be exacerbated by Trump coming back into power. I'm saying this to point at the fact that this is not going to mean the full force of the American state coming down on every minoritized person and wiping them out. This is going to disproportionately affect different people in different ways. And part of that is going to be geographic. There are going to be safer zones, if not safe zones, for trans people, for immigrants. But part of that is also going to be socioeconomic. Something frustrating, both in the sense that it's frustrating to observe and frustrating to efforts to organize and to protect people about panic, is that when people who are comfortable panic, they don't use their resources to help people who are more at risk. There are people who are realistically not in that much danger despite being in some minoritized class, who are not using their resources to stop things from happening to the people they probably will happen to because they're too worried about them happening to them. And they're not really gonna. The emboldening of fascists is a thing that people should prepare to counter in their day-to-day lives. If you're a cis person who cares at all about trans people, you need to be ready to intervene if you see trans people being attacked. If you care about migrants, you need to be ready to intervene if you see immigration forces trying to snatch people. If you care at all about people of colour, you need to get ready to punch the living shit out of a Nazi. All of these, however, I feel are discourses that are already ongoing. I think people are talking about defending communities from this kind of violence with a somewhat myopic focus on immediate physical defense against immediate physical violence. And I think we need to expand our understanding of what safety and defense means. This, again, is why I think it's important to not just talk about Orange Man Bad and the current situation, but the wider context. Things aren't good to begin with. Being made homeless, not being able to eat, not being able to access healthcare, these are problems that are more likely to kill people in the immediate term than gangs of fascists. And that's the other side of what I'm saying when I'm saying that Trump's project is not just mega Hitler hyperfascism. Sorry. That means that if you care about defending minoritized communities, it can't just be in a sort of trauma-informed sense of a foreshortened future way where you think you're going to fight Nazis until you die. It has to be in the way where you're thinking about housing people, providing healthcare to people, and feeding people. It's also important to remember that although feeding people and housing people and making sure they have what they need does not sound dangerous, cool, revolutionary in the same way that preparing to fight with fascists does, American cops do think that feeding people is a crime, so you need to bear in mind that you will be treated as a radical terrorist organization for trying to hand out face masks during a wildfire or a serious pollution event, or trying to get bottled water to homeless people during a heat wave. And the ability to disappear and not be observed by the state is just critical to building any kind of organization at all. So I'm leading to an important point here. Don't trust Meta. Remember, Zuckerberg has a podcast boy haircut and a chain now, and he's talking about how companies need to be more masculine, and he's just a terrible person who is working with Trump. You need to download Signal today because WhatsApp belongs to Meta and your data isn't safe with them, and you need to get people you care about onto Signal as well. It's just another texting service. I use it, most people I know use it, and it's secure in a way that WhatsApp isn't. On a similar note, don't trust Discord. I know a lot of people are talking about setting up Matrix servers, and if you just want a space to hang out with your friends online in, but you don't want to be vulnerable to being observed by Trump's fascist regime, yeah, set up a Matrix server and just watch some movies with your friends on there instead of Discord. Use that as your place to hang out and play video games. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent and talk about the ZAD. I love talking about the ZAD. It's my space. I'm going to do it. It's happening. Okay, so the ZAD de Notre-Dame-des-Landes in France near Nantes is this massive area of wetlands that was seized by local farmers and anarchists and communist activists who protested the development of a freight airport by squatting the land for over a decade and fighting the French state, at some points fighting like a third of the active police force of the whole French state in one go. And they just kept fighting, and then they won. And we're working on a documentary about it with Red Planet. I think quite a lot about an interview where one of the Zadistes said to us, every time we build, we are saying no. They said that the state wanted to come in and bulldoze everything, and every time that they took a step toward building up their way of life and building up their self-sufficiency on the ZAD, they were making it harder, both physically but also socially and ideologically and spiritually, for the state to wipe away what they had there. The same is true for both surviving what is coming up in America now and changing the status quo to something better where people can actually live sustainably in the long term. Every time we build, we are saying no. To use an example I know a little bit about, trans people and DIY hormone replacement therapy. A lot of people who have limited access to HRT through their healthcare provider in states all around the world, in places where trans healthcare is just non-existent, or it's really hard to access, or it's bureaucratically gatekept, or even it's there but it's kind of shit. A lot of trans people in these circumstances turn to manufacturing their own HRT. That's an example of building and saying no by doing it, right? If something that the state can do to this community is shut off access to healthcare, it's simply, straightforwardly predictable that the community will turn to providing healthcare for itself. And that act of self-sufficiency simply takes away an avenue of control that their world has over us. I guess what I'm getting at here is that the pragmatic steps for preparing for Trump taking power again, and also for solving the fundamental problems, are to pick things that you care a lot about and go and get involved. Take a couple of examples from my real life. I'm getting involved with a harm reduction hub and a renters union, because those are things I care a lot about. I'm a renter, and renting sucks shit, landlords are evil bastards, and there's a lot of work to be done protecting people doing sex work, protecting people who use drugs, because the state doesn't care about these people and just wants to put them in jail rather than making sure their lives are as happy and safe as they can possibly be. Those are both problems that will be exacerbated by far-right politicians like Trump coming into power in any given country, but they're also fundamental problems that already exist. Harm reduction for homeless people, sex workers, and drug users is very different state to state and city to city in the US. I talked about an example of it in Seattle in my video, The Endings Machine. Tenant union organising in the US is very different to the way it is in the UK, and I know more about the European context, but I know that in the US there are a lot of city blocks organising together in some places, whole cities having a tenants union in other places, or just neighbourhoods. The good news is I do know a resource I can point people to here, which is the Tenants Union Federation, which is an alliance of tenants unions nationwide across America. If you'd like to learn more about different kinds of activism and organising, I'm going to engage in a little bit of a plug here and say, if you're in my audience and you haven't already started watching Red Planet, it's a show I do weekly on Sundays, and we interview activists and organisers, and we've been doing it for the last 3 years in preparation for the way that the current order is collapsing and leading into the kind of shit that is clearly coming up now. So, if you are trying to figure out what you're really passionate about and what you want to go get involved in, that's a massive backlog of different resources where we've talked to organisers. For instance, we talked to people from the Common Humanity Collective who work in the Bay Area making face masks for air pollution, and they did it during the pandemic for COVID as well. They taught people how to make their own air purifiers. We've talked to people from tenants unions and workers unions. We talked to people from Just Stop Oil and Palestine Action, and we're going to keep on going. We have discussion episodes sometimes where we're talking about different specific topical issues, or very rarely, theory concepts that are important to talk about, but in the practical business of organising, honestly, you realise how much abstract theory has dominated the online left space and how little it matters to taking care of people in the real world when you get down to it. There'll be links in the description for everything to do with Red Planet. You can tune in live and watch the streams and chat with us. There's a Q&A section at the end of every episode. Or you can watch the VODs back or subscribe to the podcast feed. I'd like to talk a little bit about Europe and the UK. I wish I didn't have to. We all wish. They just didn't exist. Sadly, they do, so I must. When we talk about America being the dominant world superpower, the global, political, and socioeconomic hegemon, the way that it affects things does have a very kind of nebulous cultural downstream effect, but it also has a lot of very direct material effects, where people in America, and when I say people here, I mean billionaires actually, give direct material support to European fascism. Elon Musk is very vocal in his support of the Reform Party, that's Farage's party in the UK, and of his support of AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. He had a live stream interview with Alice Weidel, the leader of AfD, where they talked about Hitler and robots or whatever. It was very embarrassing. But I think it's worth lingering for a minute on why Trump's project supports these other fascist movements. It's not just that they're ideologically aligned in the political rhetoric they put out publicly of bigotry, hatred, of misogyny and patriarchy, and of nationalism. It's also that they serve something very material in American imperialism. Nigel Farage is, for all intents and purposes in the public consciousness, Mr. Brexit. He's the guy who really made Britain leaving the European Union happen. The AfD is a far-right party with neo-Nazi ties in Germany, which is seen by many as the sort of capital country of the EU. Supporting these parties weakens the progressive liberal European political bloc. That means that Europe as a bloc has less power and can't do anything independently of America. And so it makes the operation of trying to accrue as much power for that tiny little 1% of the 1% of the 1% and then pulling up the ladder behind them, it makes it easier. This leads to the effect that I think a lot of people in the UK and Europe have been familiar with for a little while now, where it feels like our countries are just like 4 or 5 years, or maybe like one election cycle behind the US. And this means in practical terms, we just have to do the same things, right? We just have maybe a bit longer to get ready, so we should be doing it. And that's part of why I feel it's worthwhile me talking about the situation in America, because the same problems impact everyone in the imperial court, every country that is systematically downstream of America, and the same solutions are the same solutions for us as well. And if you wanted any of my thoughts about our global resistance in response to climate change, thumbnail here, the world's not ending. Got 2 hours of thoughts for you. Fresh, hot thoughts. Go get them. Okay. I feel like I should close out by talking a bit about trans people. As a trans woman, I obviously have a personal investment in the rise of anti-trans politics and the oppression and persecution of trans people that has been ongoing as a result of us being used as a political football to drive the culture war and whatever else you want to call it, whatever other nonsense terms you want to describe our lives getting worse because it's easier for some rich dickhead who has fossil fuel investments. The horrible reality is that a lot of cis people just don't understand trans issues well enough to know how to defend us. And I hate that, but it is true. Liberal politicians are complacent to utterly surreal levels. I hate it, but it's true. The reality is, if help is coming, it's coming from us. And from people that trans people are directly in community with. Another reason why it's good to get involved in organizing, in organizations that are tackling problems you really care about, is that it's more people that you are directly in community with. More people who can help to keep you safe, and that you can help to keep safe in return. That's solidarity. When we talk about how anti-trans politics will affect people, we say a lot of things like, they are denying life-saving treatment to people, or people are going to die, and this is true. As a result of these politics, people are going to die. People have already died. More people will. But people will also break the law to survive. This is a fundamental and evergreen rule of when authoritarianism outright bans things that people need to survive. Trans communities are going to find ways to provide HRT to each other, and more besides. I think trans people and their allies need to think about feeding each other, need to think about finding each other secure housing, need to have serious conversations about how to build solidarity and keep each other safe from systemic violence, as well as immediate physical violence from fascists. I also know that despair is rife right now. I personally know people who have had to act to stop trans people from taking their lives after the election result. I know that many trans people have died to suicide since the election. There's nothing I can tell you that will stop you from despairing, that will pull you out of it. Grief and fear and dejection and despair are all feelings it is fair to feel in response to something horrifying. They are feelings that you need to give space to and move through, and then after that, you have to find answers and take action. They want us not to exist. And so much of authoritarianism functions on people just going along with what they are told to do before they are even met with any kind of threat. Don't make their job easier for them. Live. Don't stop existing when they want you to stop existing. You living and your happiness and your life and your joy is everything that transphobes want to destroy. Hold on to it. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. If you convince yourself the situation is hopeless, then you will guarantee that failure is inevitable, because you won't do anything. But if you choose to believe that you can make a difference, then you can make the world a better place. Together, we can fight, and together, we will win. Just as the smallest possible step, start saying it to yourself, even if you don't believe it yet. Today, I believe that we will win. Hey everyone, it's credits, end of video, Sophie. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're enjoying all these names scrolling past right now. Those are my patrons who support me over at patreon.com/sophiefrommars. This was a messy little video that I threw together because I wanted to have something to say before Trump took power. Wow, my arm is getting tired from waving. Well, that's what you get in the end of the video when it's the end of the video, and credits, Sophie. Anyway, this is just a messy little video, and I am working on more serious projects that are taking a long time, such as The Mad and the Mentally Ill, which is a project about mental health and madness and its role in society, and I'm also working on something about Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, my favourite fiction books. All of that will be available early over on my Patreon, so please check it out there if you want early access to my more serious projects that are not like this one and are fully scripted and a lot less of a mess, like how I'm just running out of steam now and can't think of the words I need to say. Oh, and Red Planet. Please go and check the links in the description to do with Red Planet, because it's a cool show and I'm really proud of it, and I don't think there's anything else like it on the internet that anyone else is doing. So, is there anything else? Bye!